West Phoenix, Arizona, September 14, 1993. On what began as a warm, ordinary evening, the Luna family carried on with their daily lives. Inside their home were parents Albert and Patricia, their teenage daughter Rochelle, and their youngest son Damien, just 5 years old. They had no way of knowing that within hours all four would be gone, victims of a man they thought they could trust. This is the story of Richard Kenneth Djerf, a man whose quest for vengeance against a family acquaintance spiraled into one of the most brutal murders Arizona had ever seen, a case that tested the courts for decades, and a sentence that ended with a warrant for death. Richard Djerf was 23 years old in the summer of 1993. By most accounts, he had a short fuse, a man prone to suspicion and anger. He believed he had been wronged, that a man connected to the Luna family had stolen electronics from his apartment months earlier. That grievance festered. Instead of moving on, Djerf let resentment grow into obsession, and eventually obsession became a plan. On September 14, 1993, Djerf set his plan into motion. He approached the Luna household carrying flowers, a facade meant to disguise his true intent. The gesture opened the door to a nightmare. Once inside, Djerf quickly overpowered the family. What followed was a calculated series of killings carried out with disturbing brutality. 18-year-old Rochelle Luna was sexually assaulted before being murdered. Her father, Albert Sr., was beaten with a blunt object and fatally shot. Patricia, the mother, was bound, restrained, and executed. And little Damien, just 5 years old, was killed without hesitation. 4 murders, 1 family destroyed in a single evening. The crime scene shocked even seasoned investigators. It was not just an act of rage. It was vengeance carried out step by step. Police investigations quickly circled back to Richard Djerf. His grudge against the Luna family's acquaintance provided motive. Evidence pointed squarely in his direction, and he was taken into custody soon after. Then came a chilling revelation. Djerf agreed to speak publicly. In a jailhouse interview, he described the murders with an eerie calm. When asked if it had been easy to kill, he replied, "After it started, yeah."
After it started, yeah.
In 1995, Good Morning Arizona anchor Scott Passmore sat down with Richard Djerf in an exclusive jailhouse interview. This was right after Djerf was convicted of murdering 4 members of the Luna family, an act of revenge against a co-worker, Albert Luna. In 1996, he was sentenced to death after representing himself in court.
It is ordered that the defendant, Richard Kenneth Djerf, shall suffer the penalty of death.
Djerf was 23 at the time of the crimes. In September 1993, he used a ruse to enter the Luna's West Phoenix home armed with a gun and knife. And over the course of several hours, he brutally killed Albert's mom, dad, 5-year-old brother, and teenage sister, who he also raped.
I was basically daring myself to see how far I could go before I turned back and, before I basically chickened out. But it was like I lost control and I didn't chicken out.
Before leaving the scene, he tried to set the home on fire. Albert later found his family's bodies, and his girlfriend called 911.
Oh my God. He said his mom's face is all taped up and he can smell gas, and his little brother's laying on the table.
The public was horrified. His flat tone, his detachment, painted the portrait of a man unmoved by the destruction he had caused. In August 1995, Djerf pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. His plea spared the state a long, contested trial, but it did not spare him from the ultimate punishment. At sentencing, prosecutors described him as calculating and remorseless. They argued that he had relished the violence, that he had planned the murders, and that he had inflicted maximum suffering on the Luna family. The court agreed. Richard Kenneth Djerf was sentenced to death on each count of murder. 4 lives taken, 4 death sentences returned. But in the American justice system, a death sentence is rarely the end of the story. For nearly 3 decades, Djerf's case wound through the courts. He argued that his guilty pleas were not fully voluntary, that his attorneys had failed him, that procedural errors had tainted the outcome. Arizona's appellate courts reviewed his claims and upheld the convictions. Federal courts, including the Ninth Circuit, weighed in. Appeals stretched into the 2000s, then the 2010s, and into the 2020s. Each attempt ended the same way. The death sentences stood. By the mid-2020s, Richard Djerf had exhausted virtually every legal remedy available to him. While the legal battles unfolded, the memory of the Luna family endured. Friends and relatives mourned the loss of Albert and Patricia, parents who worked hard to raise their children. They remembered Rochelle, just 18 years old with a life ahead of her, and Damien, the youngest, whose childhood was stolen before it had truly begun. For the family left behind, each court filing, each hearing, each delay was a reminder of that night in 1993. Justice, they felt, was always promised but never fully delivered. In 2025, Arizona Supreme Court signed a death warrant for Richard Djerf. His execution by lethal injection was scheduled for October the 17th of that year. For the first time, the man at the center of it all broke his silence in a meaningful way. In a handwritten statement, Djerf apologized to the victims' families. He declared he would not seek clemency.
In his own words, Djerf writes some brain dysfunction likely contributed to his horrible crimes, but can never excuse the harm he caused.
If I can't find a reason to spare my life, what reason would anyone else have?
In a new handwritten apology letter from death row, Djerf declines clemency.
His actions on that day were pure evil.
Now, Djerf seemingly agrees with Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell. His note calls what he did cruel, heinous, and depraved.
I blamed Albert because of a small thing in which I became obsessed with. Albert Jr. is and always was an innocent victim. No part of what I did to his family or why was ever his fault.
The Luna family deserves justice.
Djerf wrote that he has changed, but can't claim he is a good person.
I am truly sorry for all the pain that I caused to everyone affected by the murders I committed on September 14th, 1993.
For the first time, the man at the center of it all broke his silence in a meaningful way. In a handwritten statement, Djerf apologized to the victims' families. He declared he would not seek clemency, writing, "If I can't find reason to spare my life, what reason would anyone else have?" It was a message many had waited decades to hear. To some, it was genuine remorse. To others, resignation. The words of a man who knew there was nothing left to fight for. Arizona itself has a troubled history with capital punishment. A botched execution in 2014 brought a temporary halt to the practice. For years, the state struggled to obtain lethal injection drugs. Executions resumed in 2022, and Djerf's would become one of the most high-profile since that restart. The state's choice to carry out Djerf's sentence reignited debate. Was the death penalty justice or vengeance of another kind? Supporters called it closure for the victim's family. Critics warned it perpetuated violence under the banner of law. As the date drew near, Richard Djerf spent his last days in Arizona's death row facility, alone with his thoughts, preparing for a punishment that had loomed over him for 3 decades. For the Luna family survivors, the execution promised a measure of closure, though nothing could restore what had been lost. For the state, it was another test of its ability and its willingness to carry out the law's most final sentence. The story of Richard Kenneth Djerf is not just about one man's crimes. It is about a family shattered in an instant, a community horrified by senseless violence, a justice system stretched across 3 decades, and a state confronting the consequences of its own laws. In the end, history will record the dates. September 14th, 1993. The night 4 lives were stolen. August 1995, the day death sentences were imposed. October 17th, 2025, the day Arizona prepared to carry out execution. But memory will record the names that matter most. Albert, Patricia, Rochelle, Damien. 4 lives, 4 stories, 4 reasons why this case will never be forgotten.